Welcome to the Wyrd Learning podcast with your hosts, Dr. Tracy Dix and Dr. Alex Patel. Today's episode, Why Wyrd Learning? Or, What's in a Name?
Hello everyone, so it's Tracy here today on a very, very hot summer's afternoon with my friend Alex.
Hello!
So today we are talking about everything weird. Why we're called Wyrd Learning, what it means, where it's going to go in the future, and why we've decided to call it Wyrd Learning. So Alex, technically you've come up with the name, so why Wyrd Learning?
Well, I started off by, looking around at the different names, things like innovation learning, dynamic learning, etc., etc. And you know what? A lot of these are already taken.
What a
so
surprise.
Then I thought, I want this to be something that really represents me, that's something that's authentic. And I remembered back to high school where, I got picked on a little bit. I was, a bit of an awkward person. But my friends at the time would often say to me that I was weird but nice. So part compliment, part great.
Or is that a double-edged insult, like nice? Because how in university they always say never use the word nice. It doesn't describe anything. So what were your schoolmates trying to say about you? Like, you're nice. What's, vanilla? Vanilla's nice, isn't it?
Yeah. So when I was at school, I was just, a bit quirky. I had, my own interests. And I guess I was starting to develop into my own person at that point. So that's why I got that kind of,
How
name.
dare you develop into your own person?
The other interesting thing was people would buy me, for birthday presents, candles and wind chimes over and over again. And I don't know why.
Was that was that nice gift shop type merchandise, do you
think?
think?
Yeah, they were lovely.
Do you think it went with your identity as a nice?
No, actually.
Oh, okay.
But people obviously connected it.
Was it weird? Did you say wind chimes? What was the other thing you said?
Candles.
Candles, okay. I don't know if that goes with the territory of weird. I don't think so. I think it goes with the nice, safe gift to buy for someone.
Possibly. Well, basically, the reason for the name is I thought I'm actually really proud of my uniqueness and differences nowadays. So I just wanted to own that name.
Yes.
And guess what? It hasn't been taken until now.
It hasn't been taken. And also, I like the weird about you. I like the quirkiness about you. So that's really interesting what you said about, your school identity and your classmates calling you weird but nice. And it's almost like the kind of nice bit was like a token sort of, but you fit in, don't worry, you're not weird. Like, you're not weird. It's not like you're an outcast. We still like you. But also, why should you have cared that those people liked you?
I was desperate to fit in. I had very low self-esteem.
And most people are.
I'm going to get into a dark place here if we carry on.
So most people are concerned about fitting in, aren't they? Especially when you're at school.
Yes.
Like, so if you're not the popular girl or boy or popular person at school, then you want to be friends with the popular person at school. And what is it about that? So thinking about coming to university then, people do want to fit in, don't they, when you go to university? Yes. But it's also so much about finding yourself. And I think it's such an incredible opportunity to let go of the identity that we are sort of branded with at school. So, if you're at school, people have been like, oh, do you remember Alex Udall? She was weird, but nice, wasn't she? And that's what they say about you. But then when you start university, you can go, well, now I can shake off what other people think about me. And it's an opportunity for me to start afresh and build my own self-image, become whoever I want to be and find myself.
Yes.
I believed I was going to find myself at university and try lots of new things and stuff like that. So, okay, then in terms of academic attainment then, what would you say is the difference between school and coming to university?
In terms of academic attainment?
Yeah, so, so if you were top of your class all the time, say...
I wasn't.
Neither was I most of the time, actually, although I went through a spell of being top in English in primary school for one school year, I think. Although funnily enough, my science grades were actually higher than my English grades, but I still topped the class in English until someone, like there was this girl from like one of the other classes kind of joined our class, and then she was better at English than I was. So I was kind of, yeah, so it's very fluid though, isn't it? So you know, your kind of position or your status relative to other people can change when you're in a different setting. So you were at school.
It can, certainly.
And now, you know, if you're kind of looking to go to university and thinking about starting university, you're coming to a different setting. And, you know, I think it's really interesting to think about like the difference in environment from school to university, which is, you know, very international
Yes, you meet
kind of
people
community.
And not just international, but actually just within our own country. You meet people from different areas, different races, different classes, you know. So people who've had very, very different school lives up till that point.
Yeah, so I think the idea of, you know, how does everyone learn? And what kind of experiences is everyone bringing with them to university? There's a huge variety, isn't there, Alex? It's a great opportunity to kind of find yourself, try out new things, get to know lots of different people, and really sort of expand your horizons. Maybe that sounds a little bit corny, but it is.
It is.
Yeah.
And one of the great things is everybody is starting from the same point in that everyone has arrived at uni needing to make friends. So it's not like you've shown up at a school, you know, come in halfway through a year perhaps, and everyone's already formed their own niches and cliques and friendship groups. Everybody's arriving with that, you know, desire to find out about people and make friends.
Yeah, so I think that's the comforting kind of thought that you can take with you is, you know, everyone who's starting the first year especially, you know, they're all in the same position of, you know, having to buy their bed sheets, get their pots and pans, figure out where, you know, one hall of resident is in relation to where you need to go for your next seminar and tutorial and all that. And so I think there would be great empathy when you come on campus because everyone's been there before, they've been in that position. And hopefully they'd be willing to help if they can. Although, you know, very often people can be on a campus for 3 years and still not know the building that you're asking about because it's such a huge place.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I guess we've kind of deviated from why Wyrd Learning. So when I saw the name, Alex, I also kind of thought about, okay, so that's weird, like the quality, but also it kind of reminded me of a visual pun of like Wyrd Learning, which I really liked.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a bit about that?
So if we're talking about wiring of the brain, it's really quite exciting. So my background is in neuroscience. And I used to do lectures on some of this stuff. In the past, people used to believe that, you know, your brain was hardwired. You couldn't learn new things, you know, once you reached a certain point in your life. But we found out that that's not the case. You know, there's a lot of, they call it plasticity. Yep. Neurons reconnecting in different ways. Old information perhaps being lost with new connections being made. New ways of thinking. So, you know, when you're coming to university, you can start developing your thinking processes further. So we might be talking about critical thinking. So what does critical thinking mean to you?
Oh,
just a, you know, a one sentence answer.
That is a very big question, Alex. Right,
I was going to go with a simple one.
Critical thinking is kind of making sense of the information that you have access to and applying your own experience and perspective to it. So you're given a whole bunch of evidence or like a whole bunch of opinions, you know, for example, in scholarly research and stuff. And the question for you then is, what do you make of all of this? Like, so where do you stand on some of these issues? Like, what is your point of view?
Yes. So, you know, I said a simple answer. I was simply going to say it's asking questions.
So you shouldn't have asked me, you should have answered your own question.
Yes. So the interesting thing is when this was kind of discovered, you know, this idea of plasticity and the brain rewiring itself. So as I said, people previously thought, you know, everything was fixed, couldn't teach an old dog new tricks, couldn't learn new things. But it was studies on how songbirds learn to sing that demonstrated this.
Well, that is a niche topic if ever I heard one.
It is. I used to teach on this subject, so I find it very exciting. But this generated the first evidence in that canaries, it's only the males that sing, apparently, and during the mating season, they learn a set of songs. So with canaries, each year they learn a new set, they adapt them. And what you see in the brain is that new neurons are born. They grow.
Wow, just being created.
They
just
are created.
From nowhere.
You can teach
You
old
can
bird how to
teach
sing.
an old bird how to sing. I have hope yet.
Yeah, so what's interesting actually is that these new neurons make lots of different connections. They kind of go crazy and there's lots of different feelers being put out. But then you get a period of pruning.
Okay, so what's pruning?
These extra branches, the ones that aren't useful basically, are cut out.
Oh.
So you end up sticking with the really strong, useful connections. The things that get something done in the real world.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I've come from a literary background. I did a PhD, well, I did several degrees in English. And we've got this saying that's probably quite well known to many of you, use it or lose it.
Yes.
And
yes.
so what you've just described, Alex, about the neural pathways, what do?
Connect together.
They connect together, but then do they lose their connections or something if you don't lose it?
Yes, I think in different parts of the brain it might work a bit differently. I was going to use breathing as an example, but we use that quite a lot, so that's not quite right.
Yeah.
But, the idea of, once you've learned how to ride a bike, you can always do that, you can always go back to it. So there might be some things to do with movement in particular, which end up being quite hardwired. Probably things to do with balance, I would imagine.
So when you say hardwired, so are you saying that...
As in they don't change as much.
They don't change as much. Okay, well, so I've got something interesting to add to this, actually. Slightly randomly, I've been practicing my back bridges. You're on the floor.
Describe that for me.
So you're lying on the floor and your arms are like right by your ears and your feet are on the ground, and then you lift yourself up. It's a fairly popular kind of gymnastics and yoga move. And I used to be able to do that when I was a kid, no problem. And I used to do gymnastics. I've come back to it after many years off, and in my mind I am still my 14-year-old self who should be able to like bend over backwards and then touch the floor into a bridge, but I did try it once and kind of fell over. So now I'm back to pushing up off the ground, and the first time I did it, after many years, it caught my breath because of the strain, because I hadn't done it for so many years. Yeah, so I think it depends on the activities, but I think, that neural pathway that I created when I was 14 needs a lot of rejuvenating.
Yeah. And if any of you are lucky enough to do a course which requires statistics, that is an example of something you can do. Well, for me, myself, I've done about 5 different lots of training on statistics, and because I don't use it in between, I forget it and have to almost relearn it each time.
But the positive thing about everything you've said so far, though, is there is always hope, isn't there? There is always neuroplasticity. If you can't do something now, or you can't get to grips with a concept, you can't understand something, you can't do something, you can always train your brain to do it. And with practice, it also becomes easier, doesn't it? So I think that's quite a good takeaway.
It becomes easier, definitely. I'd agree with that. Okay, so if you find that you're enjoying this podcast and, we're coming up with interesting questions or making you think about things, then there's a couple of things you could do. You could, of course, subscribe to this, because that means that the next podcast that becomes available, you'll find out about straight away. You won't miss anything. You could recommend it to some of your colleagues, friends, anyone you think would be interested. Write a review, or, just simply like it.
Yeah, and that'd be really good, because then it means that we can help more people, which is what we really want to do.
Yes.
So the other reaction I had, Alex, when I saw Wyrd Learning was it kind of looked to me quite sort of as if it was a nod to like Celtic, or kind of quirky, and it reminded me of the Canterbury Tales, which I studied at school. And my teacher kind of reading everything in, is it Old English? Is it Old or Middle English? It's one of those. It's not really my area of expertise, so I'm not sure about that. I'll let you take over now, Alex.
Well, yes. It appealed to me because of the history and the additional meanings that it has. So nowadays, obviously, we've got weird, unusual, strange, and other positive descriptions. But it also used to have a slightly different meaning. So Wikipedia tells me that it comes from both a kind of Anglo-Saxon origin and a Viking Norse origin. And it's used to have slightly different connotations. So it might mean kind of a little bit supernatural, a little bit uncanny, looking to the future, being able to predict the future. And I quite like that element, because it ties in with, what we want for this
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add in a bit of a public service announcement at this point, just because of your reference to Wikipedia. And so at university, your lecturers and tutors are going to tell you time and time again not to reference Wikipedia because it's not a reliable source. It's not completely that it's not a reliable source, but you can't ascertain the reliability of it because anyone can contribute to Wikipedia. But having said that, for like a kind of initial understanding of a concept, there's no harm in having a look, just so that, it gives you a clue, and then you can follow the references at the end of a Wikipedia citation to see what the evidence is for a certain claim.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of add that caveat in as to why we're using it here. And but
and
then
why I laughed.
and now we can get back to the fun stuff. So coming back to what you said about looking to the future. So it just reminded me of something very rustic and being quite grounded to our roots, to nature. I mean, I have no Celtic associations whatsoever, but in this time of climate change and a kind of shaking up of, the way we live, we are having to really rethink the way that we live our lives nowadays and look towards a future that is more sustainable. And being at university and the type of research that takes place at university has a huge role to play in that kind of contribution.
Yes.
To the global community. So how can we sort of bring that kind of intuition to our future, like determining the future? So you were talking about seeing into our future, and I'm not sure I feel particularly as if I can see into my future. I don't think I'm that in tune with my kind of intuition and stuff like that. But we do have the power to determine our future, don't we?
We certainly do.
And so the starting point to that really is kind of thinking about what we want. So gaining clarity on what it is we want in our future, like how we envisage things. And that gives us the first steps to the actions we need to take in order to get there. And of course, none of this is predetermined. It's not static. It can change over time, but it's sort of it's a sort of calling into our intuition to tell us like what our next step is. And then as you act on certain things, whatever it is it might be, that action brings further clarity.
Yeah. So students starting university might want to think about where they want to be at the end of it. So it doesn't necessarily mean career, but you might want to think about what values, what's important to you, and what kind of lifestyle, activities, jobs could enable you to be true to yourself, to be authentic. So it also reminds me about one of the life-changing books that I read a couple of years ago, which was The Courage to be Disliked.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of just, quick summary, is just kind of saying, where you are now, if you're not happy with it, you have to be brave enough to change it. You're the person that can make that change. So be brave, have courage. And it certainly worked out for me, I would say.
Yeah, and the thing is, not everyone is going to like your decisions as you experienced, but that doesn't necessarily matter. You should live a life that is true to yourself, and not necessarily have to worry what other people think. I mean, definitely don't hurt anyone, but also, like, do we have to worry about offending people necessarily? We might have beliefs that other people don't believe in, but if they choose to be offended by it, then that's kind of their choice. They don't have to have the same beliefs as us, but at the same time, they can't push their beliefs on us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you get to university, and that's one of the great things about university, you'll meet lots of new people, you'll be confronted with lots of different beliefs, ideas, perspectives, and ideally your lecturers will be challenging you to come up with these types of things, not just amongst the people you meet, but around the work that you're doing, the research papers you're reading. So you might think, okay, something like, I'm going to draw my biological sciences roots here. So good old Darwin and the theory of evolution. That's proven fact, isn't it? Well, some people wouldn't agree with that, but mostly it's accepted as being really solid, really concrete. So, you might think, well, it's difficult to look for any holes in this, ask any questions. But did you know that Darwin was actually incredibly sexist? So there was an American female civil rights activist who wrote to him and said, I've read the theory of evolution, surely it means that women have evolved to be, intelligent. Surely it supports the right for women to be able to choose jobs and have the vote and things along those lines. And he wrote back very kindly and he said, no, it does not. What it does show is that because women don't have to compete for the attention of men,
Wow.
there's a bit of an assumption there, firstly.
Yeah.
They haven't had to evolve at all. So actually, they're a bit lazy.
Wow.
Whereas men, because they have had to compete for the attention of women, they have. And so that's why men have developed to be so brilliant and intelligent and physical prowess and that type of thing.
So, if you respected the work of Darwin before, you might not now.
Well, I'm not completely trying to blow his theory out of the water, obviously, but knowing that, does it make you look at his research and think, okay, so maybe I should ask some questions when he's talking about the roles of different genders?
Yeah, but also so as you mentioned before, so even if you find it difficult to ask questions about Darwin because his work is so seminal, coming up with counter evidence from other sources can be useful in helping you develop your own criticality. So if you haven't made your mind up yet, or if you haven't got the questions to ask, then looking at different alternative sources can help you by comparison.
Yes. So when you're asking these types of questions, what you would then do is say, okay, I'm a bit concerned about this, I'm going to look into it, and then find evidence to support your your suggestions to answer your questions.
And back to Darwin's kind of response to this woman who wrote to him. We are talking about a time when women were not allowed to publish work, aren't we, Alex?
I don't know, are we?
Were they not allowed to publish work, or was it frequently the case that work that women produced were published under the name of their male supervisors?
Yes, so that would probably be the start of the 1900s and the 1950s. So another famous example is Rosalind Franklin. This is what inspired me to go into science, actually.
Okay.
And my daughter, her middle name is named after her, so it's a nice, it's a horrible story, actually. When the structure of DNA was discovered in 1957, it was 3 male scientists who got the credit for it. Francis Crick and James Watson. They studied at Cambridge, and they had a bit of a casual, cavalier attitude towards research. So anyway, they managed to convince somebody they knew to basically show them the work of this brilliant female scientist, Rosalind Franklin. She didn't want to show them it, because she felt it was something quite important, and she was very methodical. So she was working through, her first stage, and then she was going to go on to the second bit. But this guy, Maurice Wilkinson, I think it might be, passed it over to Watson and Crick, and it's light bulbs flared at that point, and they suddenly got both the evidence and the idea for how DNA was structured. So of course, guess who got the Nobel Prize for it? It was these 3 men.
So do you think so? Rosalind Franklin, you said.
Yes.
So do you think she was reluctant to hand over the work because she knew that was going to happen?
I'm not sure.
Or at the very least, she felt like she was handing over autonomy to people who had.
Yeah, I don't know.
Perhaps the authority to undermine it or something.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And one of the awful things is her work was looking at X-ray crystallography, and in those days, X-rays were pretty damaging for people. We didn't realise well. They didn't realise. I believe she died early from some kind of cancer. I would imagine.
So the other thing we're touching on here as well is that knowledge is fluid, isn't it? So for example, what people knew about radiography then and what we know now in terms of its harmful effects. And so the path is not always smooth and plain sailing, is it? Success, whatever you might make of it. To some people it's, having a successful career, whatever that means to you, a successful life in that, you get to choose how you want to live your life, and it kind of fulfills your own criteria rather than someone else's, preferably. So I think something I've picked up from a fellow podcaster is that our success is inevitable and that we are always on the right path. And I think that's a really powerful message. Even when things feel a bit shaky and you don't feel like you're on the right path and you come up with setbacks, because in your 3 years or more of being at university, a lot of things can happen. I think it's really helpful to have this as a kind of anchor, that if you know your success is inevitable and you're always on the right path, and everything is brought here to kind of teach you lessons that you can build on, then I think that's quite a healthy way to look at, the sort of setbacks and the ups and downs of what goes on at university life, but also beyond.
Yeah, certainly one way of kind of thinking about how the world works. So who's the podcaster?
The podcaster is called Catherine Zenkina.
Cool. Just thought it was worth, throwing that name in there. So Tracy, what are your takeaways from this discussion?
I like what you said about, how the brain works, and how did you say that neurons were created, but also parts of the brain that we don't use can be destroyed. So I mean, like I said, I know the proverbs, use it or lose it, or practice makes perfect. I prefer practice makes progress, because what is perfect anyway? But it's really nice to kind of know the scientific evidence for what all these sayings are based on, even though I'm sure when whoever came up with them, they had no idea about all this neuroscience, because this is kind of quite emerging stuff. But also I think a very useful source, because I'm into popular science, not the kind of hard evidence that you are so in tune to, Alex, is I've been listening to a book called Evolve Your Brain by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he does touch on a lot of this, neuroplasticity, and, the idea of, where attention flows, energy goes. So where you choose to put your attention is where you're going to see results.
Yeah, that sounds fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little random fact I thought I'll throw in at this point.
Okay.
Sigmund Freud.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. So obviously psychoanalysis really popular, but he actually came up with an idea of how messages might be passed through the brain.
Uh-huh.
So the equivalent of, we call them synapses, but the joint between two different neurons where a message is sent across, basically. The other interesting thing is he did all this while he was on cocaine.
Okay.
So does that make you look at his work and then think, maybe we should think very carefully about his fixation on mother figures?
Is that a topic, mother figures? Is this a topic for another podcast episode, do you think?
I think it might be.
Right, okay then. I think we'll wrap up there for today.
You have been listening to Wyrd Learning with Dr. Tracy Dix and Dr. Alex Patel. Music by Defect Machine from Pixabay. Produced by Kelly Costigan.